Israel goes to the polls this weekend, and although the incumbent Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to be returned to government, there is a mood sweeping Israel for a change. Gerald Steinberg is the Professor of Political Studies at Bar Ilan University in Israel, and he joins us now. Gerald, really good to talk to you again. How closely run do you believe this election is going to be?
Right now, the polls show that the two major parties, which only together may get 40%, each one maybe 20% of the vote, so we're really talking about a split electorate here, they're running neck and neck. And as you said in the introduction, there is a considerable discussion, I wouldn't say sweeping Israel, but discussion about the fact that Mr. Netanyahu he's finishing his third period as prime minister. This will be his fourth election. And there are a lot of people who talk about needing a change. They may agree or disagree with his policies, but there is a stronger view that we need to have a different government, as we see often in other countries. That after Margaret Thatcher had her period, it happens in Australia too. When someone's been in office 6 or 8 years, whether they're popular or unpopular, there is a sense that, okay, let's try something else now. Let's take a different approach.
Yeah, as we've seen in a number of rallies, what is driving that feel or that mood?
There is first of all, there is a sense of wanting a change, but there are really a lot of economic issues. Those are things which are not often seen outside of Israel. But this election is really about big gaps between rich and poor, about the difficulties of young people getting housing. We're a very, very small country, and when I speak to people in Australia, I try to emphasize that. And there is very limited area for housing. It's a little bit like Singapore and places like that. And so that it's getting more and more expensive for young people, students, people who just finished at the university, others are getting out of the army, to be able to afford housing. The prices have become ridiculous. The cost of living for food and other things has become very high. And there is a large gap between the people who are making good livings in high-tech and other areas and lower-level service workers and others who didn't have those opportunities. That's really the dominant issue here, and a sense that Mr. Netanyahu's government, it's been in office now for over 6 years, has not addressed those properly.
And are the opposition putting up substantial policies that would address those issues, do you think?
Well, I just lost your volume. Mr. Netanyahu is focusing primarily on foreign policy issues, on strategic issues, on security. That's his area of real strength. And so we saw his speech in Washington on Iran, saying, I am the only Israeli leader, I am the one you're going to have to rely on to be able to protect those vital national security interests against the Iranian threat, terrorist country trying to achieve nuclear weapons, in dealing with all of the turmoil up in Syria, Iraq, all of the violence, the tremendous violence that we see there from spilling over into our area and how that affects negotiations with the Palestinians. He, I think for clear reasons, does not want to talk about the economic issues because the track record that he's shown has not been very good. The opposition, led by, used to be the Labour Party, now they call themselves a Zionist camp, to broaden the appeal, is focusing primarily on the economic issues and saying, here, we can fix those things where the other government, the Netanyahu government, has failed.
And do they have feasible policies that could fix the economic problems?
Well, a lot of places, what's feasible, what's realistic, what's possible to do is very unclear. Income transfers, raising taxes for the rich and lowering them for the poor, creating different job opportunities, raising the minimum wage. There are proposals that are out there. And there is a sense, at least among, I'd say 20–25% of the population at least, where we're talking about floating voters and others, that say, let's give them a chance because the incumbent party, the Netanyahu-led Likud coalition, has not delivered on those. We're talking about a coalition government in Israel. You usually have 4 or 5 parties, and they have to negotiate all the details, but the head of that coalition, the party and the political leader, if it's Mr. Herzog, who's currently the head of the opposition, we will see different kinds of policies, and they have a reasonable chance of succeeding. Mr. Netanyahu may also put more emphasis on those now that he's seen the kind of criticism that comes up in the election.
And I'm interested as to whether there is a fatigue with Benjamin Netanyahu constantly playing the international card and the security card, as we did all watch him address Congress, much to the sort of disdain of President Obama.
Well, there are obviously divisions in Israel, but there's a considerable part of the population, people who will vote for Netanyahu or vote for parties that are aligned with Mr. Netanyahu, who say the Israeli reality is that we are under threat. The Americans have not been delivering on their pledges of protection, particularly President Obama. That makes us very nervous. We want to see our Prime Minister making a strong case in Washington for that. I'm not saying it got Mr. Netanyahu a lot of votes, but it strengthened his image as the leader that can best protect Israel's very significant security interests and deal with these kinds of threats. All Israelis across the board are very concerned about an Iranian nuclear weapon capability. And if there's a change in the government, the new government will still emphasize that. And we may even see, I expect that Mr. Netanyahu will scrape out with a narrow government. But even if he were not to, I think he would still be asked to make these kinds of speeches and presentations because they really are the consensus of Israel. The conflict with the United States is a problem, and that's something that he has to deal with if he's going to stay in office, or whoever replaces him is going to have to repair relations with the United States. That is a sore point.
Indeed, repair that relationship. Well, always good to get your insights. Thanks, Gerald.
Thank you very much.